Good evening. It's 5 o'clock, and calling this session of the joint session of the Bastrop City Council and Bastrop Economic Development Corporation to order. I am specifically calling to order this the Bastrop City Council.
(5 p.m. on December the 3rd. And
If y'all will all stand, we'll have our Pledge of Allegiance.
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen.
Honor Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Well, that was exciting. We will move to item number 3, presentation by the Hunden Partners regarding the feasibility study for a regional sports complex study to be located in the Bastrop Economic Development Corporation Industrial Park. Madam City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. So Hunden Partners, Greg Smith with the Windsor Group is with us as well. These are the two groups, Greg coordinating the feasibility study and Hunden actually performing the feasibility study. Hunden Partners is on a go-to meeting. We will bring them up. Each of you would have received an executive summary regarding the initial findings to give you something to chew on as we talk through the process today. I did put action items on the agenda just in case the council or the board want to take some action, but there is no action that is required today. I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint that Hunden Partners sent over just because it's easier to see and for the folks at home than it is to try to watch it through a small go-to screen. Angela will put this with each of your teams and shareholders so that you can have ready access. All right. Great. There you go. So Ryan, you're up.
Someone don't know the switch, make sure that switch is pushed down the other way to the bottom.
Okay, Ryan.
Afternoon, y'all. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes. Hi, Ryan.
Hi there.
All right,
Can
go
you guys-
ahead.
No, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to let the team know that they can join now. Apologies if there's audio issues. I'm just getting some feedback when you guys talk, but I'll let the team know that they can join now. It still just says that I need the organizer to make me a presenter for the presentation so I can share my screen.
So Ryan, because this is small, if you go to, we will run the presentation on our end.
Okay, no problem. I know we shared the link with Greg, but do we need to send the presentation anywhere else, or is it able to be accessed through that Google link that we sent? Greg? Okay, perfect.
we're ready when you are.
Okay, perfect. Let me just send Mike Thiessen a message so that he knows to join. And then we can proceed. Okay. And would you guys be able to project the presentation onto the screen? Wonderful. Looks like we are set to go then. Okay, I've asked Mike to join. We're also joined by Emily and Ashton, who you guys met on the check-in call as well. We have brought Mike on, and he's going to weigh in on some pieces of the presentation here, but he will plan to join shortly. Other than that, I think we can go ahead and get started with the presentation, and we'll just have him jump in when necessary. So if we could advance just to the first slide, just a few updates for context here. Of course, with our scope of work, we had laid out a number of task items. We have around a total of 110 to 115 slides. We pulled about 40 of them to present today. And we just wanted to touch upon the scope of work again as it relates to the whole project. And then if we could just advance to the next one, we're going to go a little bit out of order from the scope of services, but we're going to focus on, for today, this presentation agenda. So we're going to go through a little bit of the project background and the overview, get into some of our study methodology. That's going to cover a handful of slides, just going over how we do and what we do and the progress that we've made so far. We're going to go through an overview of the national and regional trends, how that applies to the recommendations that we've prepared today. Before we jump into those recommendations, we'll go over some key market findings that helped influence those recommendations. We were able to link up with an architecture firm that we work with frequently on these sports projects, which was a huge help because David Greisel provided some site plans for us that go hand in hand with our recommendations. So we have some nice visuals to digest as a team here today for the preliminary recommendations. And then after that, we're just going to go through some of the market analysis, both on the local and regional demand side. Some of those slides you saw during the check-in. But again, just wanted to put it in context for what we looked at to understand the market and how that influenced the recommendations. We'll quickly touch on the hotel market performance overview. We'll get into some specific case studies, and then we will wrap up touching back on the site plan and the recommendations, and then leave some time at the end for next steps and Q&A. So again, today, before we get going, if we could just advance to the next slide, just to put in context of where we're at within the process. This is the preliminary findings presentation. And then over the next couple weeks and throughout the holidays, we will be working on the draft financial and demand and financial projections and submitting a draft of that, hopefully by the end of this month. And then looking to wrap up the scope of work in the first week of January with those demand financials, as well as economic impact projections for what the project would generate. So before we get going, do we have any questions from the group, or can we jump into the analysis? I take it that we can just jump in. That sounds perfect. Well, let's get going. If we could just jump ahead to the next slide, please. Perfect. And just as a little bit of a background before we jump in, wanted to touch on the fact that with the continued growth of the area from the city's perspective, showing interest from an economic development perspective in looking at the feasibility of a potential youth sports project to help drive incremental room nights to the city of Bastrop, and understanding that really the motivation of the project is driven by the potential for sports tourism, but secondarily also keeping at the forefront the importance of potential needs and quality of life for local users as we get into that. So looking to wrap both of those into the recommendations that we have set forth today, and really just touching on the fact that we want to make sure that we're putting ourselves in a position to get a piece of that booming sports tourism industry that's present within the market. Next slide, please. So of course, with the study methodology, some of the key questions that we had in the back of our mind as we were going through the presentation is, understanding where the market is now from a supply and demand perspective, understanding how the market stacks up to other competitive destinations within that relevant regional competitive market, understanding what the opportunities are for a potential sports facility and what those recommendations look like. And then over the next couple of weeks, as we do those demand and financial projections, understanding how do we get there and how do we achieve a project. So we've worked through the first two buckets on the right there. So understanding the current and surrounding market assessment, that's really the piece of the market study that we've completed. Understanding what the opportunities are, and we'll talk about that with the recommendations. And then just that third bucket, putting together those projections over the next couple of weeks. So again, more related to the timeline, but we can go ahead and advance forward. So just touching upon the study methodology, I know that we've discussed this in the past, but some of the key elements that go into the recommendations for a project we're going to touch on throughout the presentation tonight. So of course, that means looking at the existing competitive supply, understanding the size and strength of the local market, looking at the site to understand what we can recommend and what elements we can include within the recommendations, understanding how the industry trends, both from that national and that regional level, play into the realities and what we've recommended, understanding what comparable peers have done across the country. That really is about that case studies analysis and understanding takeaways from successful destinations. And then also understanding what the existing demand is, both locally and regionally, and how a project could fill gaps in the market for those opportunities. Next slide, please. Thank you. So of course, beyond just the market analysis, one thing that we've brought about, of course, throughout the process is how key these interviews are to understanding the potential for the project. And as we look at what the motivation for the project was, understanding that sports tourism is really fueling the study. So of course, we spoke with a lot of representatives from within the city and got the local perspective, but a lot of the time was spent reaching out to these regional sports tourism stakeholders. That's tournament operators, that's local competitive organizations that are traveling across the state for events and also hosting events in that greater MSA area, and understanding what their perspective about the gaps in the market are and the opportunities for a facility. And then also talking with national folks such as Sports Facilities Company and Eastern Sports Management, two really relevant competitive sports tourism oriented operators of facilities across the country, to get their perspective on the market, which were super helpful for just overall takeaways from the state of Texas and understanding the gaps there. So you'll hear from interview feedback from a lot of these groups throughout the presentation about how they played into the recommendations and what the overall takeaways were. So we can first just start with those trends and understand how those influenced us. We're going to touch on these in greater depth, but just really wanted to start with understanding the movement in the sports tourism landscape. So since 2019, the industry has continued to grow. A lot of that has been focused in the Texas area. We'll talk about how Texas is ranking currently and stacking up to other states across the country. But first, at a national level, last year, hitting an all-time high in terms of American families that traveled for sports. That included about 205 million youth sports-related trips across the country, up from 192 million in the previous year, and compared to pre-pandemic levels coming in at about 179 million. So really, since the pandemic and what municipalities that have been successful experienced throughout the pandemic, understanding that youth sports was super essential in fueling their economic well-being during the pandemic as a recession-proof industry. Total spending has really gone hand in hand with that. Again, in 2023, hitting an all-time high of about $52.2 billion, up from previous years and continuing to grow. The trend across the country has been increasing competitive sports and increased spending on these events. It has certainly been resistant to increasing costs where people are still willing to travel and spend money for these events. Within the state of Texas, more specifically, in 2023, Sports ETA, which is the Sports Event and Tourism Association, ranked Texas as the second highest economic impact state for sports tourism, second only to Florida. Within the state of Texas, sports participation has continued to grow, hitting another all-time high last year, breaking that 8 million mark just in terms of athletes at the high school level, which is really relevant because that's where you're going to get the most impact from sports tourism is in those older age groups. So still continuing to rise and showing positive trends from within the state itself. And then within the marketplace, of course, paying attention to the growth of the MSA, ranking as the 7th fastest growing MSA in the country, according to the Census Bureau in 2023. And really understanding that, again, as we get back into these interviews with a lot of the stakeholders that we talk to throughout the process, demand has certainly continued to grow, where market supply for facilities has tended to lag behind that demand. It certainly takes time to develop these facilities, and demand is certainly outpacing the growth in supply for the market, seeing a gap in the market for a lot of facilities, specifically in the MSA itself. And then really just wanting to hit on the fact that consistently throughout the process, we heard tournament operators really favor this part of the state due to its central location, which makes it easy to host events that are statewide as well as regional beyond Texas. But specifically within the state, an easy location from a drive and accessibility standpoint, which is a huge positive for the project going forward. Next slide, please. Thank you. And before we get into some of the recommendations, again, just wanted to touch on some of the high-level market analysis key findings. A lot of these implications came from both market data as well as that interview feedback, but we'll start with the outdoor sports first. As we look at baseball and softball, we spoke with 3 major groups, Bullpen Ventures, Perfect Game, and USSSA. All of these groups really relayed the fact that within the regional market, there is still an opportunity for more fields. Round Rock has certainly established itself as a destination for sports tourism within the state and really throughout the country. But they all emphasize the lack of additional facilities that have more than 8 diamonds in one location. One thing that was consistent between baseball, softball, and soccer, which are really those 3 main sports that are driving lots of sports tourism on the outdoor side, is that tournament operators are having to utilize upwards of 5 and even in some cases upwards of 11 facilities across the MSA, totaling as much as we heard as 175 miles between all of the combined destinations, where hosting events has really been a complicated issue for them because of the amount of facilities they need to leverage. So they all emphasize the need for additional facilities that have an ample amount of surfaces in one location that would help them consolidate those events and operate more efficiently. So certainly prevalent on the baseball and softball side, emphasizing the need for more turf surfaces, as across the state, the facilities they're currently using are mainly composed of grass, which leads to complications for their tournament events and cancellations. So a lot of positive feedback from those major operators on the baseball and softball side. And then soccer as well. We recently spoke with Lone Star SC, which is the largest youth soccer organization in the Austin area. And they were really excited to hear that we're looking at a potential facility in Bastrop, not only to increase the level of participation in their events, but also to build up their program on the east side of Austin, looking for a home facility to do that in, where they could bring, again, their existing events, but also create additional tournaments in the market. They felt the same thing as baseball and the softball representatives that we talked to, that there's a lack of ample number of fields in one location, which leads to the same complications that they have having to utilize many facilities when they host their events. So very positive outlook from both baseball, softball, as well as soccer on the outdoor perspective. Indoor, we spoke with basketball and volleyball organizations, which in the same vein as soccer and baseball and softball, emphasize the lack of a number of facilities that have ample amount of courts in one destination. We did discuss Round Rock with them and understanding that they have 6 courts under one roof. But typically when we're looking at these facilities, tournament operators like to have a minimum of 8 courts in one destination. And certainly emphasize the fact that there is a lack of indoor courts in the greater Austin area. We did speak with Sports Facilities Company about their newly opened facility in Bryan, Texas, with 8 courts. And it's really proven that there is a demand for additional indoor courts within the marketplace. But we'll get into the phased approach for development between outdoor and indoor here in a second. And then cheer and dance, we also spoke with some organizations to understand the size of events that are going on currently, but also hitting on the fact that there are a lack of facilities to use to be able to host some of the larger events that are going on across the state. So on the sports side, we just wanted to touch on those headlines before we get into the recommendations. And then on some of those supporting amenities on the hotel side, really great to see that the supply is set to increase with 2 properties under construction, totaling about 225 keys. But really, when we look at that, it's from demand that's growing in the market naturally. So we certainly understand with all the transient growth that's going on there and a lot of the corporate business that's being located within the market, that those additional properties are meant to accommodate the increased demand from those segments. And we want to make sure that if we're introducing a facility that's going to generate room nights, that we have even more hotel rooms in the market to be able to capture that economic impact that's generated by the facility and make sure that that spending is not happening outside of the city. So certainly would like to see an increase in hotel supply, and we can get on that at the end when we go through the Q&A. But as we look at retail and restaurant and entertainment, those are going hand in hand, just understanding that these are 2 critical components to a successful sports destination. Right now around the site, there's a lack of that development that would be easily accessible. So certainly want to emphasize the need for additional retail and restaurant and entertainment offerings, as well as more group-friendly restaurants in the market that could accommodate teams that are coming into the market that all tend to eat larger meals together. So giving them options to do that, again, capturing and maximizing that economic impact from a facility. So overall, we'll get into the recommendations here in a second, but we want to just emphasize that there is a clear growing demand for additional sports facilities within the region. And with several proposed competitive developments in the region, we want to make sure that we're making this a multi-purpose facility that's capable of accommodating a variety of sports and getting creative in the flexibility that we're recommending. So we can skip ahead just one slide to the SWOT analysis here before we get into that recommendations table. Just one more, please. So as we look at strengths for the project, we've hit on a few of these so far, but there is an increasing regional event demand and current lack of quality facilities within the region. So increasing demand, but that lackluster supply that's failing to keep up with pace of that demand. As far as location goes, a strong accessibility within that regional drive-in market, and MSA population growth naturally going east of Austin, closer to the city of Bastrop, certainly helping with that weekday demand, but also filling in that expectation for additional events on the east side of Austin in the future. More opportunities, we talked about it with Lone Star SC, but opportunities for partnerships with local and regional organizations to bring their events into the city of Bastrop with a better supply of facilities. Increasing or diversifying the hotel tax generation through sports tourism with creating a demand driver for weekend room nights through a new facility. And also as well, keeping in mind the benefits of having that increased quality of life offering and entertainment for residents and for families locating into the area. Weaknesses I touched upon with the hotel supply the hotel supply is increasing, but we want to make sure that we're capturing all of the demand that is projected to come into the market from this increased activity. So certainly we'll want to discuss the need for more hotel rooms within the market. One thing we talked about with some of the organizations was accessibility for these larger organizations within the Austin market, being about 30 miles outside of the downtown of downtown Austin, just making sure that weekday programming is going to be really key to the long-term sustainability of the project. And then current lack of commercial demand around the surrounding site. Again, we talked about that with the retail and the entertainment offerings, needing to increase the supply of the offerings around there. And then as far as threats go, we'll touch on this quite a bit, but a high volume of potential regionally competitive projects within Central Texas. Site constraints and topography, we'll go through that on the site designs here in a second. And then potential for lost impact with these neighboring municipalities looking at these projects as well. So without further ado, we can get into the recommendations table and then the site plan, and then we'll go through some of the market analysis after that. So as I alluded to, we have recommended a 2-phased approach for a project. We're going to look at the multi-purpose use of some of these surfaces. But essentially, we have recommended 8 full-size turf multi-purpose fields that would be fit for field sports such as soccer and lacrosse and football. Those can be configured into 9 full-size diamonds on a smaller scale that can accommodate up to about 18 diamonds. But when configured at a full size, high school competitive sizing on the diamond side, looking at a total of 9 diamonds there, with the need for amenities such as portable and flexible fencing. So we'll show how that lays out in the diagram on the next slide. But then in a phase 2, looking at a potential indoor facility to complement the outdoor uses. So Mike, if you wouldn't mind jumping in, just talking about the phased approach and wanting to be conservative as we react to the market and understanding the development pipeline of these other projects too, I think that would be helpful.
Thank you, Ryan. I missed the early introductions. I apologize. I'm a project executive with Hunden, and actually was very much looking forward to this meeting based on the work that these guys have done. In the upcoming map, you're going to see a number of proposed sports complexes that have been announced publicly, everything from Round Rock to Buda to Kyle to other parts of Austin themselves near the Travis County Fairgrounds. And we just want to make sure that as we look at this, we do it in a conservative manner, but knowing that when Ryan talked about the demand was well in excess of supply, sometimes we talk about that being opportunity. So the difference where those two crossroads meet, there's opportunity to fill in that demand, or there's supply is greater than demand, and that's the position that you're in. But it has to be done smart and judiciously, because as you'll see, there's competition in this marketplace, particularly in Central Texas, that's within 20 to 30 miles of you. So either can get or generate a first mover advantage, or you always have to be aware of what's going on from the fluidity of what's going on with your competitors. Because while we talk about youth sports and travel, as Ryan talked about within the millions of travel dates, this is a hyper competitive market. You are in a hyper competitive market in and around Central Texas. And the dollar amounts will be big, both from the benefit and from the cost, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to do the phased-in approach, to make sure that you're aware of what the capital expenditure would be for an indoor versus an outdoor, and how the multi-purpose field can allow you to get into this space without having to have the full capital expenditure of a $60+ million indoor facilities. So Ryan, I'll let you take it back.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And then if we could just advance to the next slide, you'll see the site plan that David put together for us. So I know that the diagram can look a little bit confusing on the right there, but what we asked David to draw up for us, and we'll go through this with some examples in the case studies, but we looked at case studies across the country that have really emphasized the need to be multi-purpose. And really what we mean by that is developing turf pads that can be lined for both soccer, lacrosse, football, and then on any given weekend with portable fencing, be lined for baseball and softball events. So as we think about that competitive marketplace and all these other municipalities in the region considering youth sports projects, having this flexibility and putting the city in a position to accommodate on any given weekend a soccer event and the next weekend a baseball event is going to be critical going forward. Being known as a facility that can accommodate all different kinds of sports is certainly going to give the city an upper hand, as opposed to just dedicating themselves to be looking at one potential sport to carve a niche out in. So we interviewed a couple facilities across the country that have taken this approach. And overall, the feedback is that operators really tend to like their facility because they have an ample supply of fields that are also able to be utilized for all different kinds of sports throughout the year. So on the left side, you can see a potential indoor facility in that bottom left corner with surface parking out front. And then on the right side is where we're focused on with the phase 1 recommendations. And again, it looks like more surfaces than are in that table, but what we accounted for in that table was being able to outline or to line these fields in the upper right quadrant as soccer fields, and then having those full-size fields also on the south side of the site. So if we advance really quickly to the next slide, you'll see an example of inspiration that we drew from a facility in Iowa. In the bottom left corner, you can see there, they have one of the fields lined as 2 diamonds, one of the fields lined as 1 large diamond, and then another one of the fields lined for a soccer game. So again, those flexible pads allow them to accommodate all different kinds of sports throughout the week, and then set up specifically on a weekend for a larger soccer or baseball/softball event, really emphasizing the need to be multi-purpose on those fields. And then in the top right corner, the representative for Texas for Sports Facilities Company, again, a major operator in the country, was the former GM of this facility. So we had a great discussion about opportunities in the Texas market with him. And he really emphasized that at their facility at the public sports park there in Florida, this facility was designed for sports tourism. And we'll get into some of that placer data later in the presentation, but has been a super successful facility because throughout the year, when they're in season for soccer, they're primarily hosting competitive travel soccer events. And then in the baseball season, they're able to switch over the facility with that portable fencing and line the field for both baseball and softball. And again, emphasizing that these would be turf surfaces. All of the operators that we talked to emphasize the need to shifting towards turf because of the dependability for those weekend events. When we talked to Lone Star SC, the soccer group, even about the event that they're hosting in this upcoming weekend in the Austin area, they talked about complications, which once the humidity hits a certain level, the municipalities that they're working with to utilize their fields don't allow them to actually utilize the fields because they're worried about beating up the fields too much and wear and tear, which really just goes back to the overall lack of supply. A lot of places can't afford to let people utilize their facilities if the conditions are bad because of the amount of traffic that they're seeing on their fields. And it really just backs up the recommendations to have these turf surfaces that are more durable. And we have run into the past of the question of, well, we are in Texas, it gets super hot. Is turf really the right answer? And we've also spoke with other competitive facilities across the country that have utilized a more expensive alternative to turf. It's still artificial turf, but they're not lined with the traditional rubber pellets that you see on a typical turf field when you think about those turf surfaces. But they're lined with cooling so that the field temperature doesn't get to be 115 degrees on a 100-degree day in Texas. So before we get into the market analysis, if we want to just flip back one slide to the site plans and recommendations, do you guys have any questions about how the fields are laid out, or how we took the inspiration from those other case studies for the project here today?
So I noticed that you took into account the detention.
The other item, I
ponds.
think that we want to make sure that we stress with the multi-purpose nature of the fields with both the rectangular sports and the diamond-based sports, whether they're baseball or softball. It's going to allow you to bid on twice as many, if not 3 times the events. So you're not only soccer focused or only rectangular sports or rectangular sport focused, but you can also then do the diamond sports as well. So I'm sorry. You may actually lose a softball one weekend, but you've actually potentially opened that up for a soccer tournament the next weekend. But you can bid on multiple things and not just have to focus on one. That gives you maximum flexibility to utilize your complex at all times.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And I know that they're having some audio issues on their end.
So the question becomes, I might just type my question to you. So for the board and the council, the question becomes that on the, this is the detention pond for the industrial park, and you can see they've programmed an internal facility, an indoor facility. So I see ponds.
If we mute, then they can talk, because I think they're getting feedback from us.
I see ponds here, and that may be the offset, but I'm not sure. But we need to make that determination. So I'm going to type that over to them.
Well, also, when you look at the depiction here, I'm not sure that's going to be enough parking spaces, especially when you look at the other pictures that you've shown on other similar sports complexes. Number one. Number two, I don't see any kind of, whether you want to call it a kiosk or something else, for food and restrooms and water and showers or something along those lines. It's not depicted here. Maybe this is just a first initial one, but obviously you're going to need to have those facilities in something like this.
Sylvia, I'll keep an eye out for your question here in the chat.
There's a lot of feedback when I turn it on.
Okay,
Like,
so perfect. The detention. So we did have discussions with Kimley Horn about that detention pond. We did have some specific conversations about if it would be possible to fill that in. And Mike, if we want to just talk about just some of those site accommodations with potentially having to relocate that. I know the restaurants and restrooms on the graphic. So the concessions stand that David did draw in is located in between the 4 quad fields in the top right corner. That little red building would serve as the concessions and the restroom. Yes, right there on the cursor. And then one thing that we have discussed with him and made him aware is that we potentially may be asking for showing commercial development adjacent to the site. So that's one thing that we can bring up to him if we want to draw in on the site plan potential uses for that commercial development, whether it be retail and restaurant or a hotel. But as far as the graphic goes for amenities on site, the concessions and the restrooms are drawn in where the cursor was located right there. And we have dealt with having to relocate detention ponds in the past. It certainly does add to the cost of the project, but David did draw in potential relocations for those detention ponds and waterways. So I can also get some specifics on him for estimations on what that would do to added cost of the project.
Well, let me bring up a point here before you go on any further.
And I know that you'll probably have more questions, Sylvia, as we go on, but I think we can keep moving. We just want to quickly work through some of the market analysis and the case studies before we wrap up with the recommendations again. Oh, one more question. Okay, no problem.
We need to keep in mind that this group here, we're not trying to have it already designed for us, what kind of fields we're going to have. We're not going to operate it. We're looking to have a developer come in, and a developer that would have an operator that really is going to be telling us what kind of sports layout they want to have that's going to be the highest and best use from a revenue stream point of view. So it's where it's very interesting to see what you've come up with, and I can agree with a lot of stuff. It's really not that's not what we're trying to accomplish right now, is the actual design of this field. So I just want to make sure that everybody's got that in their mind, that it's nice to look at, but that's not one of our tasks, if you will, for this group.
Yes, and that's, yes, and thank you for the question. We're having just a hard time hearing, but the messages certainly help. And the design certainly is flexible to change. Again, we wanted to put the project in a position to accommodate all of these different kinds of events, both on the field side and the diamond side. So again, yes, test fits can change, and an operator may have their own opinion about what they would like the facility to lay out as. But given the designs that we had David draw up, we believe this would put us in the best position to accommodate as many of these weekend events as possible that would be driving these room nights. So yes, to answer the question, the designs can certainly change. Again, an operator may have their own view of it, but from a highest and best use perspective, in being able to accommodate as many of those events as possible, we believe it's important to approach and embrace it with this flexible design.
Yeah, remember, so the key to this is, remember, this is conceptual in nature only, to do 2 things. Allow you to see how the project would be articulated in a graphical or visual sense, and then also to show space allocation. So final layout, absolutely. You know, when I walk into my family room, my wife tells me it's going to be a different color. I don't really realize it until she puts the paint swatch on the wall. So we wanted to just make sure that you could see the intent, the graphical layout, and how this would mass on the site itself. But please don't assume that this is the final layout. Again, it was just to give you a visual to understand how this matched up with the rest of the study. And your piece of
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, and certainly it's important to keep in mind for test fit purposes as we look at these demand and financial models, just what could fit on the site so that we have sound assumptions for not only the number of events, but how large these events can be, because it's really going to be important in understanding the financial projections as well as the number of people that would be attending the facility and therefore the number of potential room nights and the associated spending with that. So it's important to keep in context the overall potential for the number of surfaces on the site so that we're more informed as we do the demand and financial projections. But of course, after this presentation, we can be flexible with any wanted or needed edits to the site plan. And we can go back with David and have him reconfigure any of the site that you would like. But from a highest and best use perspective, we wanted to approach that with that flexible approach. So happy to take any other questions or comments or concerns as it relates to the site and the test fits. Okay. Perfect. If we want to jump ahead, I think we just wanted to give an overview of first, we'll go into a little bit more of those national and regional trends, and then we'll go through the market analysis. So as I alluded to, Sports ETA is really one of the leading associations for tracking sports tourism across the country. Last year, they did rankings for the top states for the first time across the country, and Texas did in fact rank second only to Florida. So a lot of sports tourism being driven through Texas for a number of factors, but really the growth of Texas and its central location across the country, as well as the public incentives that have been utilized to get these projects across the finish line, have allowed the state to leverage sports tourism in a very successful way over the past couple of years, especially coming out of the pandemic. Next slide, please. This kind of illustrates just that spending overall by region of the country. So within the Southeast, Texas and Florida are looped into that Southeast region. And by percent of number of events and direct spending, the Southeast is leading the country and is really, Florida and Texas have both led the country in terms of attractability for tournament operators to host events in both states. So we can move on to some of the more regional trend slides. Certainly want to touch on just the location of the project within the state. Great location in that triangle between Houston, Austin, and San Antonio from a drivable accessibility market. I alluded to the new facility, the indoor facility that opened up in Bryan, Texas, so just outside of that triangle. But we have some placer data from that facility to show that the location relative to Austin, San Antonio, and Houston has really made it a successful facility for tournament operators, because one thing that they emphasize is being able to have a central location to these major markets to pull the top competition from all of these major metros is key to hosting effective and competitive events. And a lot of them had great feedback that the project has a great location within the drivable region for them to be able to host some of those more competitive regional events, and has great accessibility relative to these larger metros. So next slide, please. On the more regional level, certainly paying attention to the growth east of Austin, as well as all of the corporate investment that's going into the city. Coupling natural growth with these corporate relocations puts the city in a great position to accommodate a lot of that growing demand, both at the local level, but also absorbing a lot of that programming that's going to become from these growing organizations on the east side of Austin in the years to come. Next slide, please. And Mike, I know that we wanted to touch on this too, and we talked about this in the check-in, but certainly have become aware of a lot of these municipalities in the greater Austin area. A lot of the feedback that we got from operators of facilities within Texas is that DFW has done a great job in keeping up with the growth of the marketplace with growing their supply of facilities, but it hasn't been the case in the greater Austin area. Growth as well as growth in participation in youth sports has really outpaced that supply growth. And as a result, a lot of these cities in the greater Austin area are looking at what they can do to leverage the growing demand that you felt in Bastrop as a potential for getting a piece of that sports tourism. But we are aware of a handful of these projects that are underway and just want to make sure that we're putting ourselves in a position to be competitive with these facilities as they come online. And again, emphasizing that phased approach will be key to reacting to what's going on in the market. So we have some specifics on what some of these municipalities are looking at. But from an overall macro perspective, wanting to understand and just keep in the back of our mind that a lot of cities are seeing that growing demand and are looking to leverage that by doing their own form of sports tourism facilities.
So as I alluded to that earlier in my earlier comments, if we can go back to that slide, those are your competitors, and those are also those people that you're going to be competing against for those developers. So while you're competing against the sports tourist and the family tourist as well, you're also going to be competing that for your developer, your facility operator, and your nature like this. So most of these you can Google search them and find out kind of what they're conceptually thinking. But wanted you to be aware that there may be an opportunity to have a first mover advantage, which might actually be more or less risk depending on how you look at it. But that as you think about it as an elected or as a board or as a community, that you have to know that they're having these conversations in each of these other little dots. And you may need to be flexible to either modify your design, your makeup, or your incentive packages, if that's what you are, if you want to be competitive within this world, because this world exists about 40 miles in concentric circles around you. So as you're looking for that same sports tourism dollar, these other municipalities are looking for that same sports tourism dollar. So I guess welcome to the world of sports tourism.
And then we can quickly go through the rest of some of the market analysis. Really just wanted to back up the fact that we looked at what was going on in the local market, understanding the lack of facilities in the immediate area, and more importantly, none of the facilities within the competitive set generating that sports tourism as it stands now. But that's the reason why we're here looking at a potential project today. So we can skip ahead to more of that regional analysis. Again, we kind of showed off some of the facilities that we were looking at within the region during the check-in. But really just wanted to emphasize that as we looked up and down the relevant region in that drive time radius, understanding how these facilities are performing and where they're pulling from. So we can skip ahead of the next slide as well to some of the specific place or visitation. So we really just wanted to show that, again, we'll take Round Rock, for instance. They've solidified themselves as an established sports destination in the Austin area and have been very successful in driving sports tourism across the country, or across the state, I'm sorry, with their facilities that they have established there. And they're actually planning a pretty major expansion of some of their outdoor facilities as well. But that central location that they have in the greater Austin area, pulling a high visitation from San Antonio, from Houston, from DFW, as well as the immediate area in Austin there, again, goes back to a lot of the feedback that we heard that the Austin area is a great market for hosting events in, because you can pull a lot of those competitive teams from these major markets. And the accessibility it's equal an opportunity for a lot of these major markets, which puts Austin and the city of Bastrop especially in a great position to leverage some of that existing demand in the market that isn't being successfully fulfilled by the amount of facilities in the Austin area currently. And then as we look at another facility here as an example on the next slide, the Legends Event Center. So this is the newer facility located in Bryan, Texas. This is an 8-court indoor facility. And in their first couple of years of opening and operations, they've really attracted some of the larger events from an indoor competitive basketball and volleyball perspective as they've ramped up their operations there. And again, you can see a lot of the business coming from the Austin area, the San Antonio area that really would be further away for people to travel that are going to Bryan for these events versus having an additional ample facility outside in the city of Bastrop's location that would be equally as accessible from their facilities there. So another good example of a facility that's relatively in that triangle between Austin, San Antonio, and Houston that's absorbing that demand. And then even a facility that we've studied in Temple in the past is smaller in nature in terms of the assets that it offers, but is still able, given the location of Temple relative to DFW and the Austin market, to attract a lot of that demand for these weekend tournaments that are being hosted across Texas. So even a smaller facility that's within the regional competitive set, attracting a lot of that business. So if we skip ahead here, I believe we have the overview of the interview feedback. So Emily, if you could walk them through that really quickly, and then we can continue on there. If we just go back one slide.
Yeah, it was right before that implication slide. So just 2 back, I think. One more.
There we go.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Ryan. And I know this is a lot to look at, so I don't expect you guys to read it all right now, and you can digest it later. So I just want to, highlight some major takeaways from these conversations. But as Ryan mentioned earlier, we spoke with tournament operators and regional organizations within the Central Texas market, both involved with indoor and outdoor sports. These conversations are really critical to our analysis and help us shine light on, what's happening in the area, where is the demand coming from and for what sports, where people are traveling to, and, where are those tournaments being held, those facilities that they like to go to and why. Again, these people are in this and see this activity every day because they're in that industry. So overall, very helpful conversations. So again, I'll just highlight some major takeaways. I know in our check-in call, I did go over the Youth Basketball Association and then USA Volleyball. So I'll just kind of say some high-level comments there, and then I'll dig deeper into the outdoor sports. But for those court sports, the facility, the ARC Sports Center in Houston, so the Youth Basketball Association guy that we interviewed, he owns that facility, and he regularly has to turn away demand because there's such high demand for court space. Houston, Austin, and San Antonio are still underserved and present growth opportunities due to the booming demand for court space. And then the region overall lacks large dedicated sports centers that could cater to the rising numbers for basketball teams. So having facilities with more than 12 courts. And with that USA Volleyball representative that we chatted with, they hold over 70 events a year or tournaments a year. And when they're looking at different facilities to go to, they aim for facilities with a benchmark of 12 courts or more. And that's in volleyball terms. So that's 6 courts for basketball, 12 volleyball. So just want to clarify there. Many clubs in Texas own their own facilities, typically in that 4 to 8 court range, but the standalone non-club managed facilities are rare. So another comment that I want to emphasize, the larger facilities with more than 12 courts, again, 6 basketball courts, are not necessarily feasible unless there's constant programming to fill them. So that's talking about that weekday demand. So practices from both local and regional organizations. And then there's that increased demand that creates that need for more quality facilities that can host those larger scale tournaments. And then I'll highlight here more of those outdoor sports. So we spoke with Bullpen Ventures, which is a Texas baseball tournament operator, and then USSA baseball and softball representative. So a minimum of 6 fields is essential, with 8 to 12 fields as that optimal range for attracting out-of-state teams. Texas facilities with 8 to 12 fields are highly desirable for hosting competitive baseball and softball tournaments. Ryan kind of mentioned this earlier, but the weather in Texas allows for year-round programming. So many facilities are booked for local leagues and tournaments nearly all the time, every day. And those tournaments run Thursday through Sundays, with peak teams being 24 to 32 teams using 3 to 4 fields. So kind of getting into the turf conversation, while many fields are turf, there are concerns about the heat related issues with that management. So at a minimum, having infields being turfed to improve that durability and reduce cost was mentioned, or really emphasized. And then the availability of nearby hotels, restaurants, and entertainment options is crucial for supporting out-of-town teams. Markets that lack adequate hotel accommodations can drive away tournament operators and teams. The Round Rock facility was mentioned as a good facility, but the current usage is high, and there's a limited availability for new user groups trying to utilize that facility. And then San Antonio also faces a shortage of sports facilities, which also creates an opportunity to meet the growing demand for events within the greater region. And then for soccer, we spoke with Lone Star Soccer Club, which is one of the largest soccer clubs in the greater Austin area. He noted the need for additional and higher quality soccer and sports facilities in the Central Texas market. There's a shortage of suitable fields for competitive tournaments and league games, while current fields are often suffer from poor maintenance and weather-related issues. He mentioned a tournament that they had to cancel because of rain and messing up the fields in that way. So he said that the artificial turf fields is in high demand. This soccer club currently hosts sorry about that. The lights are off in this room. Hold on.
Yeah, and while you're fixing that, Emily, just one thing I wanted to bring up, an interesting thing that the representative from Lone Star brought up too, is their interest in growing their footprint on the east side of Austin and bringing their assets to the city, having the ability to program and build up their organization on the east side and partnering with the city to make sure that they're growing their program and providing consistent utilization and usage of the facility would be a huge plus for them. He mentioned a tournament that's roughly 600 teams that's going on this upcoming weekend. And it gets back to what we were talking about, their need to utilize 11 different facilities across the region. But with additional fields located in one location, he mentioned just the benefits of reducing costs from their side and also being able to accommodate roughly 200 more teams for their event that they would be able to bring in to help participate. So he was very high on the opportunity for more additional quality turf fields, and was really excited just to hear about the potential utilization of an additional facility out in Bastrop.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. That's exactly what I was gonna point to, was that struggle with spreading events across multiple facilities. That was very emphasized in that conversation. So you can see that there's clear demand for a consolidated, high quality complex where all those fields are in one location.
And then, and Emily, I know that just on the next slide, we've kind of hit on a lot of the regional implications. So if you wouldn't mind skipping ahead to just the hotel interview so we can move into the case studies and wrap up with the recommendations, that would be great. But Emily, if you want to just high level these real quick, that would be great.
Yeah, and again, when we send you guys this full report after, there'll be more data to support this hotel chapter, but just want to emphasize some of the conversations that we had with local hoteliers. So Bastrop's tourism is highly event driven, and hotels in Bastrop have a high portion of leisure travel, and hotels experience constant demand on weekends, especially during those major events. But midweek bookings are a bit slower. November through February are generally those slower months for tourism, though that proximity to Camp Swift helps those hotel rooms with military personnel. And then the lack of enough hotel rooms to meet that growing demand, like Ryan mentioned earlier, could be an issue in the future, especially as events continue to increase. And then the business from Tesla, SpaceX, and the Boring Company have employees coming to town, and they see that becoming a significant part of their visitor mix. And I'll turn it back over to you, Ryan. Those were those major points that I wanted to emphasize.
Yeah, thank you. And then I think we can advance just into the case studies before we touch back upon. Oh, thank you. Yes. And then just that last bullet point too. One thing that we certainly want to emphasize, and we have some information in the appendix once we send this over, it touches on the benefits and the pros and cons of private versus public management. I know the intent of the project is to partner with a private operator to handle the operations of the facility. And really one thing that goes hand in hand in terms of being able to drive that sports tourism is partnering with groups like Sports Facilities Company that we interviewed throughout the process, that not only we would look to, again, and yes, Sylvia, I see your message, the importance of bringing in that third party operator, as we've discussed, is tapping into their network of existing events and being able to prioritize weekday utilization for the local groups to support the bottom line feasibility of the facility, but then emphasizing the need to reserve programming rights on the weekends so that they can route their events from a regional tournament perspective on the weekends. Again, there are a lot of benefits to having that third party management, and I know that that's the ultimate goal of the project here. So we have some content that just speaks to the overall pros and cons of bringing in that third party management versus having the public operator. From a case studies perspective too, in interviewing these groups, there's a lot of takeaways that really influence the success of a sports facility. So first, before we get into the operational success factors, the destination factors we've talked about with the retail, the entertainment, and the hotel, but having a facility that's high quality with ample number of fields to accommodate large events, a variety of lodging, dining, and entertainment options are certainly important for these players and teams that are traveling. As the sports and tourism industries continue to grow, a lot of the business mix has been from families vacationing and making vacations out of tournaments to destinations. So having amenities that can help accommodate that is certainly important to driving year-over-year return visitation from different events. Having desirable competition, I touched upon with having that beneficial location within that triangle between Austin and San Antonio and Houston. And then, of course, reputation of the destination and making sure that an operator, this is where a third-party operator is also very important, is paying attention to their performance metrics and customer satisfaction, which is something that they take very seriously to ensure that people want to come year over year to their facility that they're operating. And then from more of the operations role on the next slide, speaking to the importance of having that dedicated marketing and business development plan. Again, that goes back to the importance of utilizing a third-party operator that's always looking for the optimization of the facility and making sure that they're looking ahead to booking events, having that dedicated management and collaboration between a public-private partnership or operators of a facility, working with the city that they're located in to make sure that they're upholding their ends of the agreements. And then that owner, member, and community buy-in, understanding that it is their role to drive those additional weekend visitation and room nights. So having the voice within the community to say that this is a facility for the local utilization during the week, but on the weekends, it's mainly meant to emphasize and elevate the profile of the city from the sports tourism perspective. So a couple facilities that is evident in. Yes, thank you for highlighting that. Certainly very important. As we look at some of those facilities that I mentioned, as we gather inspiration from, or before we got to the recommendations and looking at how they're operating, again, we just wanted to highlight some of the important facilities that we looked at, mainly in Iowa and in Florida, for their. I'm sorry, is there a message being typed?
Let's try this.
Yes. Wonderful. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if you had a question. Yes, I'm sorry, and I'll try to get through these so that we can catch up on that conversation. But again, as I alluded to, there's a gentleman that's in charge of that regional business development for sports facilities companies, who was the former GM of this facility in Panama City Beach. Again, he emphasized that when they were pursuing this facility in Panama City Beach, it was designed specifically to draw visitation from across the country. And really what he had talked about is the benefits of those multi-purpose turf pads. So as you can kind of see in that picture on the top, there are some of the surfaces that we laid out on the south side of the site. But even those diamonds that you could see in that top picture, they utilize for field sports on the weekends, which has really allowed them to become not only a hub for baseball and softball, but also soccer. And that's really evident. If you would skip ahead to the next slide, please. Just looking at that placer visitation from across the country. They've not only been successful in the Southeast and in the central part of the country, but also all across the Midwest. And if you look at this map that's expanded across the country, they're drawing teams from the West Coast as well. A lot of their visitation does come from that over 50-mile threshold because of sports facilities companies' management of the facility, where they're emphasizing a lot of that visitation to be brought in from across the country. And one thing that's really interesting in that graphic on the bottom right is the visitation by day. So one thing that they do really well is programming throughout the summer months for some of the more national showcase tournaments, whether it be for baseball or for soccer across the country. They're hosting events from Sunday to Sunday, so 7-day events where they're bringing in hundreds of teams to compete. And again, that's really due to the operator having a voice in the programming of the facility while it was being designed, and then making sure that they're routing a lot of their national events to this facility, emphasizing that the municipality is really looking forward for sports tourism enhancement. So a great example that we had some great conversations with throughout the process. And then the next one is where we got some inspiration for that multi-use pad. Again, we talked about it, the TBK Bank Sports Complex. This facility has also undergone a phased approach, not only with the development of the facility, but also with the infrastructure that they've built around with hotel and entertainment. So I believe on the next slide, we have some of that placer data showing the regional visitation from within the Midwest that they attract. So looking similar to the Florida example, but a little bit more regional in terms of the tendencies. But as you look at that weekly visitation throughout the year, a lot of that visitation is coming across from the weekend events, drawing people in from all over the Midwest, including St. Louis and Des Moines and Chicago. And again, when we speak with them, it's really the benefits that they talk about are being able to quickly repurpose those fields and line them either for baseball or for soccer, which has made them a really popular destination in the Midwest for sports tourism. But then one other interesting thing that we just wanted to touch upon too is when this facility was designed, it wasn't surrounded by many of these commercial assets. And yes, thank you for hovering the cursor over there too. Again, you can see the uptick on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday visitation from those long distance visitors. Again, as you look at the trends of these facilities throughout the weekdays, they're primarily local utilization for local organizations to host their practices and their league play and their camps at. But on the weekends, they tend to shift over to target that regional sports tourism business. And then just on the next slide too, it's a really great example of development that has followed when these facilities have been successfully developed. So just outside the complex, currently or recently completed a wine bar and a brewery. 112 hotel rooms came on shortly after the complex was finished, and another additional 88 rooms from a Spring Hill Suites are projected to be opened in 2026. Also on that pad on off to the right where we have that future Iron Tee golf concept, that's currently under construction and is similar to a Top Golf concept. But due to the consistent visitation over the years since the facility has been opened, a lot of development interest has been generated by some of these retail and restaurant groups and hoteliers that are looking to leverage a lot of that increased visitation that the complex is bringing. So a great example of an indoor and an outdoor complex, but again, emphasizing from the management perspective there, just the flexibility that they have has allowed them to be a very successful facility, not only in the community, but also from that regional sports tourism perspective. And then before we get back to the recommendations, one other thing that we wanted to highlight, if we could just go maybe one more slide, I believe. Just with the typical funding methods that we see across the country. So we'll just take Round Rock, for example. When they really started to explore youth sports tourism back before 2010, they issued bonds to help develop Old Settlers Park. And a big part of funding those bonds or backing those bonds was from a 2% hotel tax increase that the city passed to help with those debt service obligations year over year as the facility was really ramping up and generating that net new visitation. But other examples that we've seen as funding methods across the country, we've seen TBK in Iowa leverage TIP financing, or TERS if we're talking about the Texas market. And then another facility that we've looked at in the past, the Mid-America Energy Complex, also in Iowa, passed an incremental sales tax increase to help fund the project. Now, typically, hotel tax is a little bit more popular of a tool utilized across the country because it's not intended to burden the local population with increased taxes. But the bottom line that we just wanted to talk through is that similar to other industries that generate tourism, like stadiums, yes, thank you, arenas and convention centers, youth sports complexes and having access to some of the financials from these facilities that we spoke with operators, it's not uncommon for them to operate at a deficit because of how costly they are to operate. And in many cases, they will operate at a deficit. Some facilities, when they're operated correctly or have the right mix of offerings, can make a net profit at the end of the year. But it's very rare for a facility to operate naturally off of revenue generated within the facility and that net income at the end of the year. There's often a gap in the debt service obligation and the net income available for paying back that debt service that's required to really keep these facilities financed. And it's not uncommon for a public entity to have to dedicate ongoing support to the debt obligations for a facility. And really that investment from the public sector is really realized in that incremental net new activity generated by these facilities. So again, the room nights and the hotel tax generated by new tournaments coming to the market, as well as that spending within your local restaurants and retail shops. So Mike, I know we just wanted to talk about the complications there in terms of funding and how other cities have gotten creative, but really emphasizing the fact and setting the baseline that these facilities aren't revenue generators for themselves and often do need help from the public sector as ongoing operations perspective. And Mike, you're on mute, but I know that you wanted to add some narrative there.
Well, I think it just gets back to that the notion that this is a competitive venture. So you're going to be competing against all those other markets. And if they choose to be a hotel motel tax municipality that'll help with the developer to build the complex or to help offset operational losses or to put hotel motel tax generated increment into marketing, it's just got to be, everybody's got to be aware of what's going on with that. So it's similar to the days of when people were building convention centers and bringing in, now they're redoing Tourism and sports tourism is just a subset of that. So you're bringing those new net dollars into the market, but you're also getting a facility that should help the residents in that Monday through Thursday when the youth and the park districts and everything else can utilize those fields. And then you're utilizing them hopefully on the weekends to generate those tourism-based incremental dollars.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, and again, we have well over 100 slides to share after this, but we just wanted to walk through some of the high-level findings and then really discuss and leave time at the end for Q&A. And hopefully now that we have some of those audio issues fixed, I would like to just leave it on the site plan because I know a lot of questions were generated when we had that slide up. So if we just go one more, that should be good. And I just want to open it up for discussion before we talk about next steps for just Q&A and any other things that weren't able to be vocalized during the presentation.
Do we use the microphone or just, okay. Do you guys, when you were talking with the other areas in Central Texas, you mentioned Hutto, Pflugerville, Kyle, Buda, and places like that. Did you get a sense of what their plans are, number one, and number two, how far along are they? Are they just discussion points? Is it something the project has already started? Or can you give us a little better idea of what they're doing, what they're planning, and where do they stand so far?
Sure, and they're definitely all over the place. I know that, Mike, you can speak to the Maynard project since I haven't been personally involved in that, but Mike and I have also been doing some ongoing work with Kyle, Texas. So we have some specifics on what they're planning for there and looking at some partnerships more on the outdoor perspective. They don't have as much land to be able to provide as many surfaces as we have here for Bastrop. So they'd be looking at a smaller facility with some strategic partnerships that they're looking to leverage, but they're more focused on the outdoor perspective, but have also have been looking at potentially an indoor facility. Now, we've been kind of more in a high-level advisory role for them, so unsure how far along they are on the indoor perspective, but it is something they're contemplating as well. I know, Mike, with the Maynard project, it was an RFP for a similar highest and best use concept, but do we have any more information on that?
Oh, so that's being contemplated as a mixed use complex with youth sports or with sports field as part of its anchor. But they're also prepared to do issues related to hotels or an indoor that can be attached to a hotel where they could, in addition to doing sports, do light trade shows or light shows that can service the community as well as indoor sports. They're much like you, have this explosive growth headed east from Austin. So they're looking at it as also a tourism driver, but also a way to supplement quality of life within Maynard itself. And they have some land, much like you. And they're going to do a combination of what they can help incentivize and what the developer can help incentivize, and hopefully create a hybrid in there that everybody shares with the financing across the overall mixed-use development until the flywheel gets going, and then it's generating those taxes within the complex themselves.
And another one that we discussed with Lone Star SC was another planned expansion for the Old Settlers Park in Round Rock. They're looking to add additional turf surfaces. And one of the questions that we asked them, knowing that they're a huge user of that facility, is even if that expansion is to go through as planned, is there still additional demand for another facility in this part of the greater market area? And he emphasized that yes, from an organization perspective, somebody like that's in the competitive soccer space is again looking to expand their footprint all across the region. And having another home facility on the east side of Austin would be a huge strategic advantage for them, and would also allow them to, even with those increased number of fields on the north side of the MSA, being able to host events where they can put different age groups in the east side and older age groups in the north, or whether it be their more competitive play on the east side and some of their younger and larger groups in the north side. It's certainly a strategic advantage for them to have as many facilities as possible, because overall, even with that expansion in Round Rock that's planned, They still felt both on the baseball and soccer side that there was a lack of outdoor assets. As we've alluded to, we certainly, they're all over the place in terms of where they're at in their progress and where they're looking at. Which some of them we don't have great information on. We've just heard from the operators that they've been in talks with these cities, but that can mean any number of things as they're just high level looking for engagement. I would say overall, there aren't many that we're aware of that are far along and propose to be breaking ground anytime soon. To the best of our knowledge, of course.
My curiosity here is I've looked at what you put up there about the other parks that you've looked into, and it looks like there's a vast difference in the amount of land that they have, somewhere like 270 acres versus what we have available. So how is that comparable?
Yeah, and that's one thing that we wanted to pay close attention to with David. So we sketched out, or we measured on Google Earth, for example, that Iowa complex that has that 4 quad that we have kind of similarly represented here in the top right. So we measured out 20 acres that they needed to complete that. So that, again, that's why this exercise with the test fits is so important, to understand what exactly the reality would be for these surfaces. And I'll just go back to some of the interviews and some of the industry standards that we look at when we're recommending some of these facilities. Having the ability to have at least 8 fields in one location from a field sport perspective. So again, thinking about soccer and lacrosse and football, and then having a minimum of 8 diamonds. So we have drawn 9 full-size diamonds here, would be enough to bring an event to a certain location. So we certainly did keep that in mind, the overall acreage that we had to play around with here versus some of these case studies, and making sure that we were checking ourselves in terms of being able to fit them. Very confident in terms of the number of fields that we have to supply here, and the test fit that we did to make sure that we're not going over or over committing the number of fields that would be able to be located. So we certainly kept that in mind as we asked David to draw these up. And another point that we could just talk about in terms of editing the site plan, we also could ask David to do another rendition where we take away that phase 2 recommendation of a potential indoor facility and all that parking, and add some additional fields, which would increase the field count. That's also another option that I just wanted to mention there. But it is a great perspective, and we did pay attention to the relative size of the site versus some of the case studies that we looked at.
My concern is, let's talk about parking, because that would be my concern. That's not a lot of acreage, and parking seems to be a problem we always have in Bastrop. So if we talk about the logistics of that early on, because let's just talk about baseball teams. So, right, if most tournaments are a minimum of 32 teams, and for 32 teams, you're talking about a minimum of 1,600 people that are coming. Yep. So if you divide that by 4, right? Because the average person brings the mom, the dad, the player, and a sibling, right? Except for me, who has 8 siblings to drag along. But if you look at that, I mean, that's a lot of people. And I know we're just looking at this little miniature drawing, but we're talking about that many people, and that's a very small tournament. Those people have to have a place to hang out. I mean, when I'm looking at this, I'm seeing bathrooms in the middle of those 4 fields, but baseball people know that you've got these 4 over here. You better have a bathroom, because you're talking about kids that are not going to be able to walk that far to go to the restroom. And that's just when you're talking about baseball kids. Soccer teams are bigger. There's more people. You have to have somewhere for those people to hang out in between games, right? My point is, I'm worried, is there enough space to do this with only that amount of acreage?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair question. And I think at the point that we are now, that's probably the number one thing that we should put up when we start doing the actual master plan design, or we go forward with a potential developer, is your requirements for distances to concession stands, distances to bathrooms, distances to either a central parking location and then a spoke and wheel parking location, because clearly we know my parents, when they go to the grandkids stuff, they'd want to park closer versus where we're happy to park away and get our extra steps in. But I think those are all truly legitimate questions. And it's just not it's not at this point during that where these things get worked out, but they get, as we start peeling that onion back and peeling that onion back and peeling that onion back, we look at the proper space allocation. The bigger issue is if we weren't allowed to get 8 fields on here, then we're really not attractive for youth sports tournaments. And it's easier to figure that out now than to go back and figure out like, oh, shoot, we don't have enough land. We can only get 6 fields in. That takes us out of the competition for some of the bids that we would have to do for youth sports tournaments. So again, this is just to give us a sense of massing and what's available on the site. But those level of details we 100% have to address in the next couple steps of the process.
Yeah, and it's again, it is a great question to ask, because with even some of the largest facilities that we've worked with across the country, that's one of their number one issues. And I'll just use Grand Park in Westfield, Indiana as an example. It's the most visited youth sports facility in the whole country that spans 400 acres. And that's one thing that they really struggle with, is the location of their parking relative to the fields that they play on. And the number one complaint that they get is not only parking, it may be located far from the fields that people are playing on there, but the reality is that when people go to a destination for a weekend and they have a game at 8 a.m. and then their second game's not till 4 p.m., they won't even leave the facility because the parking spots are so hard to come by, and people will just park there in the morning and leave all night and not plan for too much turnover during the day. So it's the right question to keep asking as plans do advance, because that parking and that distance to the fields is certainly important. One thing that I can do to provide is one thing that David always pays attention to is the metric of parking spaces per surface as we do these. So before in the coming weeks, as we prepare the demand and financials, I can also provide a high level estimate of the number of parking spaces that he has drawn on this diagram relative to the number of surfaces that we have, just so you have a sense of total parking inventory by phase. Yeah, and I apologize. I don't have that metric off the top of my head, but I can open up an old model and I can send that metric over to you before the end of the night when we send this deck over to you guys. So I'll have that in my email to you, Greg.
Ron, we've talked about the competitive nature, the number of facilities open in the Central Texas area. I guess one of my concerns is, do we get to a saturation level? Do we get to a point where the supply outdoes the demand? And then that brings into the question the sustainability of something like this. I've noticed that the 2 examples that you have provided, which are outstanding facilities, I'd like to replicate them here, but they are fairly new. One's in 2017 and one's in 2019. Do we have some examples of facilities that have been generating the appropriate level of income for 5, 10, 15 years?
Yeah, we can definitely pull some other examples that we've worked with in the past that have been around a little bit longer. Just the one thing that I would really bring up is, as the industry has grown and new facilities have come online, they've certainly adapted to more of what we're looking at here in that multi-use nature. So I would say that newer facilities that have the advantages of learning these best practices from other facilities that came before them have adopted some more of this flexible multi-use nature. So we can pull some other examples and provide you guys with some additional placer analysis to show the long-term stabilized visitation at a facility. But overall, I would say that keeping current with the trends of new development, more of them have moved to this more multi-use design. But again, happy to pull any other older examples that we have, especially paying attention to ones that we may be able to get some financial information from.
And Ryan, make sure that you point out the growth of the sports tourism visits over the last 4 or 5 years, because that's not just grown 5% a year. In some cases, it's exponentially grown, which is why there's a shortage of fields now, because the demand for fields has increased at a greater rate than the natural development of fields. So you're still at an imbalance within the market.
Yeah,
That was one of our early slides when we talked about the growth of the industry as a whole.
Yeah, and that's why I think it is super important to have these conversations with groups that are experiencing the lack of supply and the complications that they have, to really hear what they're having to go through. I mean, even in talking with some of the baseball and soccer groups in the market, and this is really relevant in a lot of markets that we work in, but organizations often have to cap the level of participants that they can take on. So really cutting people from teams and only having a certain amount of teams per age group due to the allocation that they can get from a municipality in utilization hours for practice throughout the week. So it is a great question, and that's why I think we emphasized the number of projects that are being discussed in the market, because there is a point where, of course, there would be a saturation of the market. But right now, with all the conversations that we had, especially with stakeholders that are aware of a lot of these projects that are coming online, it wasn't much of a concern because of the amount of struggle that they've had in getting time at these facilities. So it again, a very important question to answer. But I think that's why we wanted to approach it in putting the city in a position where it's a facility that could accommodate on any given day at any given time any sport that would like to utilize the facility.
Ryan, my question, can you hear me? I'm on?
Yes.
Okay, great. My question is definitely on the financial benefit and just the overall benefit to the city and to the area and as an economic driver, because that's how we started this whole thing. So seeing that last statement on your presentation of not really generating measurable profit without having your revenues of funding tapped into, I definitely would think that we do not want to ask the people, to up sales tax or anything like that. So my concern is, when you go through all of this, how do we measure the benefit, the financial benefit of the investment? Because I believe phase one was, on your examples, about 43 million, and phase two is 50. So going through all this, how do we project the financial benefit of even doing this?
Yeah, no, and it's a great question. And that's what we're going to be answering in the next couple of weeks here. So just a little bit of an overview of those demand and financial projections. As I said, it's super helpful to have this diagram to understand the assumptions for what a potential facility would look like. So going back to the conversations that we had with these operators, understanding good assumptions for the number of events that could be hosted at a complex during the week, and then also projecting based on comparable facilities the amount of utilization that would occur in a facility throughout the week. We are going to be working towards getting those projections for how this would perform on site from a financial perspective of the facility. But then that economic impact projection is going to be based on the number of events that would be hosted at the facility. And what we do is we make assumptions based on industry standards for spending per day on day trips and overnights for people that are visiting the facility. So how much are they spending on transportation, lodging, in retailers, at restaurants, for entertainment? And then we will flow all of that spending that's projected to happen both on-site and off-site within the community through in-plan multipliers, and then through the relevant tax streams that would be generated by that spending. So that over a 30-year period, we'll give you projections for how much hotel tax would be generated, how many other relevant local tax streams would be affected, as well as we can also show from a state perspective what those incremental state taxes would be generated by the project. So it really is going to be answered in the next 2 to 3 weeks. But again, it goes back to getting assumptions for the number of events that could be hosted at a facility like this, given the number of surfaces that we'll be projecting here. And oftentimes too, I mean, that's the overall question is what's the public sector's benefit to supporting projects like this if they are needing ongoing assistance from an operations perspective. So I'll just say that again, it's great to hear that you guys are under the assumption that you're going to be doing a P3 and bringing on a private operator, because it is their job and their nature of their business to optimize the operations of the facility from a financial perspective. So it's often a huge benefit to have just that assumption going into a project so that we as consultants don't have to advise the city that whether they should be doing public or private. Private certainly helps to mitigate that downside from an operating loss perspective, and optimizing those operations and focusing more on the impacts that would be seen from those net new taxes, which is really the investment return that the public sector tends to see.
I just wanted to speak to something you said, because I loved your question. I want to know that as a resident, what's going to be the benefit, right? One of the recommendations was hotel occupancy tax, and Sylvia kind of looked at me like, That, here in the city of Bastrop, ours is 7%, correct, Sylvia? We're correct. In Austin, it's 11%, so they're taking 11%, and of course, the state takes 6%. So we have a lot of wiggle room. A 2% increase is not going to impact us at all from a hotelier perspective, but that's a lot of money for the city, and that could be used for that as well. And when you hear that tax in your cities, you're like, tax, no more tax. But that's not something that affects our residents at all. And so we do have that wiggle room there. And even as a hotelier, I don't think it would hurt us at all from a hotelier perspective to raise that, because we do have so much wiggle room. And look, the truth of it is these people traveling, and I looked at the map where all these places are going to be along the map. And then I saw Bastrop out here, right, as a sports facility. And as a hotelier, I'm still saying they're going to stay with me because they don't want to drive in that Austin traffic, right? So I see that as an advantage to having a sports facility versus those other locations. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, and that's why I did allude to, we've seen, I mean, I know that offhand another facility in Wisconsin and a handful of other facilities have opted to go for that hotel tax incentive to help these projects get financed because of that exact reason. They don't want to place that burden on the locals and the residents. And the nature of the project trying to be motivated to driving sports tourism and drive heads and beds and additional room nights. It's often a commonly used tool to get these facilities financed or help back those bonds that would be issued, is that incremental increase in the sales tax. So yes, that is a very common tool.
Yeah, I had a couple. First of all, what is your assessment of, this is an isolated piece of property, and there's not much, I can't think of much way to integrate it in, to the city, proper. So we're going to have an issue either with bringing in hospitality infrastructure, restaurants and hotels, either to that area, or we've got to be really good at being accessible so that they can easily get in and out, back into the city proper. Because if we try to bring the restaurants into there, the local population
is going to have a hard time going there during the week, to supplement that business during the week. Conversely, if we don't do a good job of, like the example you said, where, nobody wants to give up their spot, so they, bring sack lunches and hang out all day and eat concession stand food. We don't want them to do that either. We lose a lot of the benefits, that we have from, creating this facility. So I just think, what is your assessment as far as the restaurant inventory and the hotel inventory, and how is that going to need to change to accommodate a facility like this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we certainly have seen plenty of cities that have pursued these developments in the past that haven't emphasized the need for those supporting assets. So I'll just bring up that Grand Park example in Westfield again. We're actually helping them right now. Their facility got off the ground in 2011, and they didn't focus on attracting the correct or the appropriate amount of supporting amenities. So they lagged behind in hotel development, and they lagged behind in this retail restaurant development. And a lot of these surrounding cities around them absorbed the room nights that were generated by their campus. And again, it's the most visited sports complex in the country. And a lot of the surrounding cities have absorbed those room nights because they didn't place an importance on increasing or dedicating those development efforts into the commercial side of things. So right now, we're actually helping them master plan around the district to help leverage and utilize those parts of the picture. But I would say that, again, as we brought up in one of the weaknesses in the Swot, with the current level of hotel inventory, people that tend to travel for toured or tournament events tend to eat around where they're staying in hotels. So right now, I would say one of the concerns for the project is the overall hotel supply within the city. Because if people are staying in surrounding municipalities and they participate in a game at this sports complex, but then they drive 15 miles back east towards Austin and they're staying at their hotel there, it's more than likely that they're going to eat around their hotel as well. So I would say that it certainly is a concern, just the overall hotel inventory as it stands. Again, trending positively with more properties coming online, especially properties that are branded and are attracting people in, the more branded properties that they're used to. But certainly having ample supply of group-friendly restaurants within the city and hotels to accommodate the people traveling in, it certainly helps the natural growth of the city, and that demand is increasing. But as it stands right now, certainly a caution as we look to a project getting off the ground and retaining a lot of that economic impact that could be driven by the project.
Let's also keep in mind that we've got, 6 new hotels coming here, 5 new hotels coming here, number one. We've got Burleson East coming in here. We've got a lot of new development, a lot of new restaurants. We got a lot of things going on, and that's not even 5 miles away from where this would be. So good questions, and we got to take a look at it, obviously. But I think there's certain ways to mitigate those concerns, especially since we're so close.
Yeah, and even just being in the market there for the site visit, seeing the level of development that was going on both residentially and commercially, I mean, things are trending in a positive direction. It's just something to keep in the back of your minds as you look towards capturing all of this economic impact, is keeping an eye on the level of development, both retail, restaurants on the commercial side, and hotels, that this is the right time to pursue this development as more of that development is coming online.
Ron, I have a question. So, Ryan, thank you for the presentation. Right now, it feels like the project is municipally owned. That doesn't sit well with me, just because these are always lost leaders, one. But two, to Cynthia's point, and to TJ's point, The mechanisms that we've talked about consistently from day one with the subcommittee, and for those of you that are new on the board, has been a venue tax, but we have a different venue also in the hotel project. So that's potentially 2 venue taxes. And so we have to be really sensitive to the hoteliers that it doesn't raise the price of the room and end up pushing people away anyway into the Smithville or Elgin markets, 1. But 2, a privately owned piece of land begins to have the conversation of a TIF and a TERS, a tax increment reinvestment zone, whereas the taxes appreciate, that gets spilled back in, which is also the appeal for it being privately owned and not publicly owned. And then thirdly, if there is an incremental increase in hot funds, that's sustainable. None of those being general fund operations, but that is really simply for the debt service. The concern becomes the operational service. And so the P3 partnership that we form with whomever that is becomes absolutely critical if we're willing to help maintain the debt, quote unquote, that we won't have a deficit in the operation of flow, especially since there's nobody on my staff qualified. I am certainly not qualified to go run an event center like this. And that's one of the reasons we sought out the private sector, because they know how to make money. My experience has been municipal golf courses and aquatic centers and things who consistently lose money. I bring in the private sector, somehow Shinola, they're making money. And I don't know how they do it, but municipalities are never good at that. So I just want everybody to be cognizant. We've got a bunch of levers to pull. We've got a lot of thought to think about on how, who, and what. And I don't want to scare the residents at all, but I do appreciate the comments that are made in here that it is a fine balance with public use of it, especially for the local leagues that you heard come to the table. So I really, really appreciate that. And the last thing that's super concerning that we'll have to talk about the site plan, and I know this is not set in stone, but we're going to have some compatibility issues with the neighborhoods around it, especially as it relates to light and sound. So we've really got to think about some of those buffers, and that may mean some reconfigurations of the roads, et cetera, but those are just, brain dump.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning that, because like I said, we remain flexible with any changes that we can request David to make on the site plan. So happy to discuss any relevant changes once we send this over and give you guys time to digest more about this diagram and can mark it up with comments and concerns about any changes that need to be made. We can certainly ask David to make some changes to the site plan and help accommodate those comments or concerns.
I have a question, please. Has the topography map been laid over the site plan as well?
Yes, and he always takes that into consideration. Again, these are some high level drawings. Mm-hmm. I know that he was concerned with the topography there, but I mean, I will say that we've worked on projects in a much worse position in terms of the overall site layout. Again, as I mentioned, it can increase the cost in messing with the actual topography of the project to make sure that it's pad ready and site ready. But really, it tends to come down to a question of cost versus not being able to develop on the current topography. But Mike, did you have any insights to add there? I mean, it's typically something that we deal with on these projects. And again, we've seen it a lot worse when we get into a market and they say, here's our site. And we're looking at a 100-foot drop down a valley. I mean, we've definitely seen everything when it comes to site concerns, but not as bad here relative to other projects. And he definitely took that into consideration when looking at this.
You've got some slight topography. This might just be cut and fill. We've got another project we're working on that's in a floodplain. And instead of embracing the fact that it's in a floodplain, we're going to use it as a water feature and have the fields and some of the development be there so that the water becomes a focal point, even though it's excess water, but it is in a floodplain, but we're utilizing that to the benefit of the project, not to the detriment of the project. So again, that's one of those things as we start peeling those things back within the onion that we'll be able to take into account all of the different things once the site's been finalized. And I guess I just want to make sure that the next phase, a lot of the questions related to the economics and what will the facility generate on an annual cash flow and an expense and some things like that will get answered. So just be a little bit patient and let that evolve, let that come, because you'll know a lot more, both in terms of the impact on the taxes it'll generate and what the actual cost to run the facility in the next 3 to 4 weeks as we finish that next phase. So I don't want anybody to leave with preconceived notions of what they may or may not think is going to happen. Let that play out, because there's a whole nother level of detail that'll come that'll spur even more questions related to the finances that we just don't know until we start addressing the economic issues within the model, the number of fields, how aggressive do we want to be on play, how aggressive do we want to be on tournaments, so on and so forth. So just let that mature up over the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Any other questions, council?
I just want to emphasize what our city manager said about the residents around to the east and the south, and you're talking about the maybe tweaking the plan a little bit. Just please be very sensitive to the east and the south, that there are neighborhoods there, and we do not want to impact them negatively at all from this. So please take that into consideration.
Understood. Well, if there are no more questions, Greg, I am going to take some time just to go through the deck one more time and prep it to send over to you to distribute to Sylvia and the rest of the team there. I'll send that over so that, like I said, you guys have some time to digest the presentation, provide any comments, questions, or edits to the deck. We will get working on setting up the demand, financial, and economic impact model. So that as those edits come back in, we can make any adjustments based on the assumptions with the recommendations there, so that we can keep progressing and look to get you guys a draft of what those financial and economic impact projections would be by the end of the month. But I'll have this sent over to you today. And of course, just feel free to provide any comments or questions back to us so that we can address them in the next version of the deck. Thank you. Wonderful. Well, it was great to see you all again. Like I said, Greg, I'm going to take some time with this, but I'll send this over to you tonight so that you have a full copy of the 115, 120 slides.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all. We'll talk to you soon.
Council, I guess we'll move on into work sessions and briefings. 4A, discussion and possible action by the Bastrop City Council regarding the information presented by Hunden Partners regarding a feasibility study for a regional sports complex to be located at the Bastrop Industrial Park.
Really from that, I'm just looking, is there any direction that the council wants me to specifically give to Hunden or the EDC, since this is both an agenda item, other than the compatibility issues? I'd be interested to see what they bring back as a financing source. But I do want to be specifically clear that we said we didn't want to be the owners.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
And so this has a municipal ownership feel, and I'm getting the heebie-jeebies from that.
And Cynthia, just curious, where did you come up with the $43 million for phase one?
On their slides, they have that.
That's in
right
Panama
there.
City Beach.
On the
That's
one,
not.
one with, well, from the models they used, one was Florida and one was Iowa, and so that's what the number was for them. And then
Okay,
they
because
came up with the
I
design.
thought you were meaning that was what they came up with
Oh,
for this.
no, that was just their example.
Got it,
But,
got
yeah.
it, okay.
No. I wish I did.
Yeah.
Well, other than them coming back with a few changes in their presentation based upon the conversation we have here, I'm unsure that there's any action from council at this point in time. Council?
No.
I'll second that as well. I mean, I don't think the EDC has any action items here. We have more information and we have more discussion about it But I will say that one thing I'd like to suggest is that when we hear the next, that the sports committee, the subcommittee get together and discuss it in a smaller format and see what we come up with, okay?
Mr. Plunkett, do you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to, on the committee, so, for anybody in the public listening, I think it's proper to note here that, at this point in the feasibility study, the idea is, okay, what ballpark, and not to use a sports term, but yeah, where are we playing in the market? And I think that's what we were looking for here. What they're basically telling us is, yeah, you can fit 9 baseball fields and 8 football, soccer fields. So, I mean, that's what we needed to know. And that tells us, okay, and so that tells us we get this level of tournament, and what they're saying is that's a good level. And that's what we didn't know going in. And it's important that we know, at this point, it was, if we could only get 3, then it's like, okay, we're kind of, we're going to either do volleyball and basketball or we're not going to do this. So that's where we are in the process. This is not about, oh no, we need to turn these, 20 degrees, to the, counterclockwise so that they fit the lot there. That's not where we're at. This is just, hey, here's a piece of ground. Is generally what will fit on it.
And maybe you guys aren't confused. I'm a little bit confused, and Greg, maybe you can help me because we talked a little bit about this. When you go back to the slide that talks about each of the sports, it seems like basketball and volleyball were the major drivers. It said there's a shortage of fields, there's not enough even in the Houston area, there's not enough. I go back to that slide.
Yeah,
But-
they referenced it. They had the facilities up in the Dallas area, but further south, they did not have the basketball or
It's this
volleyball.
one.
Yeah.
And so when we, and so I'm a little, maybe I missed something.
Initially when they looked at this, they thought it would be a good potential option, which got them a little bit nervous about it. Looked at the unknown of what the folks are doing, and the upfront investment of this is very high. So one of these facilities, we told me it was roughly $60 million, just like the ballpark figure. So that was kind of what some of that was coming for. That's why they said, I think that's why they suggested that phase 2, you could do that in our facility. At that point, you maybe better assess the market.
Got it. Okay, I missed that part.
And if you'll notice, there was no information on the size or even a guess of what size the enclosed facility might be. We saw the fields, but we didn't, on their layout, there was no indication of size, if you will.
I think they said, what, 12 courts?
20 acres is kind of the number that can build the 8-court facility that they believe is off. So I think it's very rough right now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's that second to last bullet on the indoor volleyball, 8 courts for facility.
So any other comments, questions,
Let me ask a
directions? Go ahead.
So if we're wanting someone else to build it and manage it, why, I feel like we're taking a square peg and putting a round hole with this land, right? Like, there's a baseball player building one in Roanoke, exactly what they predicted, except for $70 million, except his has shopping, walkable stuff, he's attracting the people around him into it. Here, no one knows it. Like, I started asking all my neighbors on my street, do you know where our business park is? No one knew it, right? I think this will affect, Tanishan Village is going to know it, a lot of lights. All the businesses are going to have people parking in their parking lots because you need 1,000 parking spaces. Why this spot? Couldn't we attract somebody who wants to do it somewhere else?
Well,
And I'm new to this, so maybe we've already addressed this land has to be the only place for it.
yeah, we'd have to kind of go back years and years and years about the highest and best use and what can we do to actually accomplish economic development that would also incorporate revenue streams as well as something that's good for the community. And we looked at this and it's like, hey, we've got 90 acres here, right? What could be a very good, positive impact thing? And that's where we came up with this. Some time ago, it was like 5 or 6 years ago, the Gardner study, remember? And it came out with the same conclusion. Y'all need to take a look at a sports complex. So it really kind of goes back several years on that. It's a good question. It's just that right now, if it had to be somewhere else, it would probably be private property because it's not on city.
Which is
we don't have.
still, absolutely, I mean, to answer the question, the long and short of it is, this would be a potential revenue source for the EDC from whether we're holding the land, selling the land, leasing the land, whatever that is. But to extrapolate this and pick this up and let's say put it on Highway 20 or put it somewhere on 71, absolutely, the same incentives apply, with the exception of it is more private industry driving it. And it may be that this investment is just too great and we don't have it, and we turn it back over and say, okay, we tried to digest this elephant, it's too big. Let's bring in a different partner who maybe has 100 acres in a more optimal location that doesn't have, neighbors right around it. And then we turn our business back to being an industrial park. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah, that's the whole reason for the feasibility study. We may all think it's a great idea, but at the end of the day, if it comes out where it's either not big enough, we can't support it, it's too expensive, whatever it may be, then yeah, it's like, okay, we tried, we did really good, we did our due diligence, so now if we have to go back and say, let's just bring businesses in, that's what we'll do.
We did a super rough pencil that included a TERS, a venue tax, and some of the other possible layers of economic incentives. Because the chapter, the 380 chapter is in the local government code is a page. You can essentially do a whole heck of a lot. But the tools that you layer within that are specific to something. And we did receive the qualified hotel project. So that's kind of its own morph over here. We would have loved to marry it here, but there's just not enough land. So to your point, maybe this isn't the site. Maybe they've said you don't have enough hotels around you, you don't have enough, transit, your roads aren't proper. And so then we go, okay, let's put our hat back on, and what does that site look like if we're still trying to pursue sports tourism, which I think the community in the subcommittees, man, they came out strong that I want a place for my kids because I'm spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, at least that group anyway. One parent was over 20 grand a year. And that was a common story. And that these are deep pockets these parents are investing in their kids. I say that, but I also remember you've got to pay the light bill and the water bill and the heating and cooling bill.
The numbers either work or they don't work. We'll show in that determination stage. So good question. Good question. If there's no other questions, we have item number 5, citizen comments. Madam City Secretary, do we have anybody signed up for citizen comments? Angela, do we have anybody signed up on your side for citizen comment? Thank you so much. If there's nothing else, we'll move to item 6, adjournment. Mr. Chair?
That's right. If there's nothing else from the EDC, then we will move for adjournment as well.
Council, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I have a motion, Mayor Pro Tem. I have a second from Councilmember Plunkett. We stand adjourned.
All right. Need a motion to adjourn from the EDC board.
Motion to adjourn.
Need a second? All in favor? Very good. Then we will be adjourned. Thank you.